How many of you attended the workshop I did 2 years ago, December, on conflict resolution? Okay, only about 5 or 6. Okay, so I'm not covering material directly that I did there. I have another entire workshop that I do on mediation. This is a little bit of a blend, okay? So one of the things that I have felt is that conflict is one of the most underappreciated things that happens in society, not just the church. Conflict has a bad reputation. If conflict was a human being, we have slandered conflict because it has the potential to be one of the most powerful things to leverage into growth and progress and health.
So true.
So conflict doesn't mean you're a bad person. If you feel bad while you're in a conflict, that doesn't mean you're a bad person. It doesn't even mean you've been wrong. It means that something is getting your attention. And you should view it as, something's getting my attention. What am I going to do with this? Later on, you may view it in a completely different way. You may even view it as a blessing, as a positive turning point by which you were able to have an opportunity to grow or get brand new insights, either about yourself or about another person or about something that has happened. So that's off the get-go. I first went into conflict management for schooling. I got a master's. I went in 2010. And I realized after I finished the program, I launched out as a consultant, that people didn't want to, some of my former friends didn't want to be around me. And I mean, literally they'd tell me, Steve, conflict is like going to the dentist. You have to deal with it, but who wants to go to the dentist? Well, I had friends that were dentists, didn't appreciate that, but I got the point. And so I figured I want to rebrand this thing. So that's what I've kind of done. And so that's where I'm coming from. I'm not afraid of conflict. I go to it. When I hear about it, I meddle sometimes. Sometimes I get singed by doing that. I get a little bit of trouble. But it's a lot better to go to a conflict than have it come to you. Or if it's going to come to you much later, rather have it come to you sooner so you can get ahead of the game, right? So avoiding conflict is not a sign of character. Avoiding a conflict that you shouldn't have is a smart idea. But avoiding one that you're ultimately going to have to deal with is an opportunity to grow. Go ahead and tackle it. Okay, so number one, you've got your notes in front of you. We're going to talk about this concept of embracing a third-party culture. In the Bible, there is not a singular role for how one person helps two other people. Okay, so you have tribal officials, repairers, intercessors, mediator, prophet, judge kind of a person, a priest, judge, a peacemaker, a wise one, a moderator, an advocate. In the recent times, since the 1970s, there's been a real crystallized definitions for these things. But in the ancient world, there wasn't. So in the days of Paul has this, he sees what's going on with Onesimus and Philemon. What does he do? He just throws himself into it and tries to fix the situation by a little bit of manipulation, a little bit maneuvering, a little playing his role, his position in their lives. And it's not a refined art. It wasn't in the ancient world. What happened in the later 1970s is America was the most litigious nation in the world. There were too many people that watched Perry Mason. We're going to go take him to court. We're going to sue the heck out of him. Yep. And that congested the court system. So then what happened was a bunch of judges, I think a couple of hundred of them met in Boston and said, we got to do something about this. And so the idea was we need to create a measure in between. And out of that became all sorts of civil mediation to sort out issues before it gets to the courts. Or if it gets to the court, they push it back And it took about 15, 20 years, but eventually all 50 states have mediation as an option or even as a requirement. And that's called evaluative or facilitative mediation, where it doesn't care if you have a relationship after it's all done, it solves the problem. The church world figured out, but we care about the relationship. We'll call ours transformative mediation. So that's my training. My wife has training in both forms, as I do. And so that's when we're talking about it in the church world. We're talking about not only just sorting out a conflict so that the two parties agree to what's happened, but let's make sure we have lessons learned and we repair the relationship and we're going to be good with it and better off in the end, and so forth. So, but that's just one way to approach it. Like I said in the Old Testament, there's many ways. An arbiter is a ramped up form of a mediator. A mediator is working on the relationship. An arbiter will say, if we can't sort out what this topic was, will you allow me to be the one who decides at the end? And I'll lay down. In the Old Testament, somebody would just do that and say, this is the way it's going to be, if the people couldn't figure out amongst themselves. So that's what Solomon does when the two women come, both claiming this is their baby. And so he's just saying, here's the outcome. Here's what I'm going to do. Boom, we're going to split the baby. Of course, that was a tactic to figure out who was who, in that situation. Now, I can do arbitration as well, and sometimes I do it in the church. I see these two people that they have an issue that might be, could be in leadership. Here's where I think the church should be led, this way or this way. And you can't get them together, and one's going to have to go and one's going to have to stay because neither one are going to give up their position. That's really rare that I've had to weigh in on something like that, but I'll do it. Prefer to have them solve their own problem, me to coach them along the way, which is more mediation. On this page, there's a circle, a secular example, where there is 10 different ways that a third party can help two parties in conflict. If you are a reader, and you like to read and grow, and this is an area that you would like to advance in, I would recommend reading The Third Side by William Ury. And it's a book that companies who use, organizations will help people how to problem solve in the workplace by using somebody else in the workplace that's detached from the problem to influence the two parties that are not getting along. I think this would be great if this would be great if the White House read this book. It's an awesome book. Now, remember I told you that in the late 70s what the court system decided? A book changed the nation. And a co-author of that book was William Ury. Have you ever read Getting to Yes? Ever heard about it? Getting to Yes? Awesome book. I think it's a couple bucks on Kindle, a couple dollars on Kindle right now. But it's how to play to the better side of human nature of the other person and yourself, and where you have a yes. Everybody wins. Win-win. And if the third party feels like they're winning too, so it's a win-win-win. But anyway, this became kind of a movement in the court system and the church world too, because churches have conflict. When you're in a church, you're in 24/7. You're in 7 days a week. You have more likely to have conflict in the church than you will in the workplace, because you get to go home at 5 o'clock. You go, hey, I don't have to think about this until tomorrow morning. No. But in the church world, that's your identity. And so you'll have more likely to have conflicts throughout the course of your life in the church than you will in your workplace. And we sometimes think, well, Christians should never have conflict. Yeah, we're the only ones that are actually talking about sin, and that always gets you into conflict. So that'll do it. Some of these roles you see here in the circle. A provider. Hey, I think I know what you guys need. Or a teacher. Hey, there's another way. You guys have even thought of this other way. And here's some principles that you could probably help you. A bridge builder. I'd like to introduce you to solutions based on past precedent, how people solve this predicament. Mediator, let's work it out. That's more about the relationship. An arbiter, okay, here's what I decided is fair, and will you agree with my solution, even before you know what the solution is? Okay, an equalizer. And let's try to make sure this is fair, because sometimes you have a person who's more of a powerful person, higher rank, greater influence, and they're playing those cards. An equalizer says, no, let's forget all that. We're just two equals sitting at the table. A healer is trying to think from the emotional standpoint. A witness, hey, I have information from what my investigation showed up that's different than what you guys are saying. A referee, okay, put the guns down. By the way, I had a professor that mediated in church situations twice where guns were brought out. Yeah, so scary stuff, right? And then a peacekeeper, just somebody managing the moment for whatever, okay? Why is a third party uniquely valuable when there's a two-party dispute? What do they bring to the table? Yes?
Maybe a new pair of eyes.
A new pair of eyes, okay, yes.
Unbiased.
They're unbiased, they have no pony in the race, hopefully. Neutrality, yep. What else?
More objectivity.
More objectivity, they have less emotions, right? So they can think more clearly, right? What else might they have?
More experience with a certain topic.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's what I was going to say. They have a catalog of things that neither one of the two have in their life catalog that can be introduce some new ways of looking at things. There's another thing a third party brings, and that is when you know a third party is going to look at your situation, you behave better.
That's true.
Okay, it really plays well, because I don't want to look like the bad guy, the unreasonable one. Okay. So next on the second page, this is really important in a church culture to understand, is some biblical principles that are deeply embedded in the Old Testament. Before I discuss these, I want to introduce a concept. In the ancient world, about 800 BC, there was a justice system that we know a lot about because some various versions of tablets survived, and I forget the name of the system, how to pronounce it, but in the Babylonian, a king, Hammurabi or something like that. I'm butchering the name badly, okay? But it was a collection of a couple hundred sayings that he got from studying other nations, that here's how we're going to solve problems. And some of it was really, really great. But there was a couple different inherent flaws in it. One of them was it favored people of higher class. And another one, even more serious, and again, I might have this wrong, but if two parties were in a dispute and nobody knew which side was right or wrong, and by the way, I might be butchering this, this might be Egypt in this particular illustration, but in the ancient world, this is how they dealt things, is if two parties in a dispute, we'll throw them both in crocodile-infested waters, and the one who lives was the one who's right. Okay, that kind of thing, okay. And I've written about this, but I just forget the exact details. But what we do know about the Egyptian and the Babylonian systems is they were the best that the world had at the time, and there was some really good stuff, but they were really, really way off, full of superstition and status and class and rank. Then you come along to the teachings of Moses, and it was like a big, huge surge of progress. It was like a renaissance, like way ahead of its time. Matter of fact, so influential that Western civilization, you can see the impact, almost like DNA, rippling through Western society all the way up, crossing into the Americas, and the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Americans' court system on justice and fairness, and how you treat aliens and immigrants, and they have equal footing at the table. All of that is in our Bible. If there's any reason to believe in the Bible that ought to be compelling in a 21st century context, is to look at what God had way ahead of any other civilization that we see that Moses unveiled. It's like wow, that there's something divine in it. Justice and impartiality. The pursuit is justice and justice alone, verse 18, or verse 20 of Deuteronomy 16. You want to have trustworthy facilitators. We have Jethro advising Moses on how to identify people along a category of competence. People could solve disputes for tens, 50s, hundreds, and so forth. And he gives them some criteria. Moses later on, 40 years later, talks about that, and he's embellished that system or refined it. And then the process is to be known, fair, and open, meaning they're accessible, so they can't be rigged. And that's described in Deuteronomy 17 and 19. And then Jesus, when he talks about if your brother sins against you and this whole thing with witnesses, he's actually restating Deuteronomy 19. And that's all right there in the scriptures. And so if people know that they have a problem with their brother or sister, and they're part of a church that's competent with conflict, and they know if they go to get help by a person who's known to be good at this, if they know it's safe, they know it's just, they know that person's going to be impartial, it's going to make them feel what?
Safe.
Safe. When people feel safe, they're in their best form. So here's what we know about the amygdala. I mentioned this earlier. The amygdala operates when we feel threatened, helps us make quick moves under emergency situations, but also hijacks our brain and hijacks the hippocampus, our emotional system, so that we don't think straight about our threats. And it causes some sort of distortion. So when a husband and wife, for instance, get in an escalated conflict, and they're up here and they're screaming, yelling, and saying the worst things about the other based on their weaknesses from the past, playing to the worst of the lower nature of somebody, and how long do you think it takes for somebody to de-escalate from their worst place to their best place?
Yeah, I know.
It can take
A week.
It depends. If there's not a deep PSTD wounds and stuff that's at play, but it's just a one-off bad situation, it can be as little as minutes. But typically, it might take an hour, it might take a day. But what can you do to speed up the process by which the person can calm down and feel safe? What can we do to do that? You're in a conflict with somebody, with your spouse or your boyfriend or girlfriend or roommate. What can you do to make a person feel safe?
Hold their hand.
Hold their hand, okay?
Stop talking.
Yeah.
Stop talking. Ask if you can hold their hand. Okay, right.
Oh, give me that.
Yeah. What else? Yes.
Maybe ask them to help me understand.
Yes, that's a really good one. Help me understand. Or if they already have said it, that might insult them. So you can say, I want to hear what you're saying. Can you say it again in a different way? I want to make sure I fully understand it. Whenever you give them power, that helps. Yes.
I try to restate something. I try to restate to show them I'm listening to what
Okay. And it even helps when you say, is it okay if I restate what I think you're saying? Because you're asking them permission. So it means that you're giving them a little bit of influence. Yes?
it might be hard if your amygdala's firing, but presuming positive intent.
Okay. And even stating that. Okay, yes.
Checking your body language and your tone of voice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, be kind to the way that you communicate.
Right.
Gentle.
And it's also your face.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this creating softness, yes.
I guess like if it gets to the point where maybe two people like reconvening, like saying like, can we do this another time, or like can we do a timeout? I'm not ready.
Can we do a timeout? I feel like I need time to think about this. And also say, we might need some help. Who would you feel that you would trust to get some help from? That can be effective. Okay. So big stuff. These are important. Okay, now, besides emphasizing biblical principles, there's this thing about your story. We all have a conflict story. So let's imagine two people that are not getting along, and there's a lot of stories behind it, a lot of history, but it finally hit some big flashpoint. So this could be a really, really long story. And so what I've done as a mediator, I've asked people to, in a page and a half, provide these items here. Number one, a prologue. That would be the first paragraph. Tell me about your history. I first met John in 1983. We were part of the same Bible discussion group, and it was a good memory. We had very fond time in those early years. Okay, that's the first paragraph. That helps the mediator coming in to know some positive place to play into later. Second paragraph would be the build up to the flashpoint. And that might be one or two paragraphs of saying, we started to not see eye to eye by the late 90s, and we found ourselves competing over such and such. And our relationship is strained, and we drifted for a time, okay? Then there's the event, okay? And this one happened in a church where we have a brother who's temper tantrums quite a bit. He's unhealthy. He's on medicine. He gets professional help. But he also speeds when he drives. Scares people all the time. And he has a physical demeanor that's intense. So you've got to have a couple of paragraphs to put all that stuff. Okay. But then there was the showdown. There was a place and time. And there was one church that I helped that was called the wedding cake incident. I'm not going to go into it because it might be online somewhere and I don't want to. But there would be like these things get names, you know, because they're so piercingly memorable to people from their own fields of view. So that's a flashpoint. So then you talk about the flashpoint. And still, you remember, you only get a page and a half here, right? And you're not using a 6-point font. I mean, so you give these people this direction. So then you put a paragraph, this is my perception of what's going on. John has temper tantrums, and there was one time he stuck his finger in my face and he humiliated me in front of the church, and my daughter was watching, and I've had it with his temper, and somebody needs to deal with it. And then the final paragraph would be the ask. I hope that John will see what he does, he will acknowledge it, and that I will get an apology, and that he'll apologize in front of the church that saw all this thing happen on a Wednesday night after midweek. Okay, that's first draft. Okay, then as the mediator, I go back and I help take out all the barbs and the edgy things and all that, and I distill it from the toxins. And I'll give it back to him. I'll email it back and say, is this good? Oh, yeah, you said it much better than I did. Yeah. Okay. Trying to help you out here because we want to be solution-oriented. There's the good. There's the context. There's the build-up. This thing happened. And then I help them say, this is how I remember, as opposed to, this is what happened. You've got to give some flexibility. Anybody that's been married a long time knows it's a whole lot better to say, this is what I thought you said, as opposed to, you said.
Yeah.
Okay. How reliable do you think our memories are? There was a study done, and I've looked for this study, and I have not been able to find it, but I learned of it in school, that the people of the greatest integrity have been tested where they have told a story. It's been recorded. Years later, they tell it again, and it looks nothing like the original story that was recorded. And this particular study said every time you tell a story, it's like taking something off the hard drive, corrupting it, and putting it back on. And you don't know that you've done that. So you've created a narrative that's not reality anymore. There was early on, Tom Brokaw, a highly respected newscaster who's now retired. He's written like 2 biographies and whatever. But in one of them, he told a story of an early interview that he had with somebody about their bad behavior in the interview. And it was recorded. And then he wrote his version of his memory of it in his memoir. Somebody goes, no, I remember that. And they found the original tape. And it was Tom Brokaw who said the offensive thing during the interview. See, what happens is we transfer. There's all forms of transference. And when people were upset with their ministers in 2003 in this crisis, that many of you know what I'm talking about, many of you probably don't, but people transferred their own issues or their parents' issues or previous leaders' issues onto their current leader. And it doesn't mean they're bad, it's a psychological thing that happens. So memories are not reliable. They're just not. You should not trust yours, not trust theirs, but don't assign motives to yourself or the other person. Just give some flexibility. Being willing to say, I might have misremembered it. Okay, is that good?
Yeah.
Okay, that's why you want to have this elastic language and this presenting story. That's what I call presenting story. And it's been so helpful for me. And you know what it does? It makes the conflicted parties do all the homework. I'm pushing things back to them, pushing things back, so that by the time we have a session, they're in better form, but they've been doing the real work and under my guidance. So anyway, okay, now we have a little bit of an exercise for you. Okay, under point 3 of the agenda, let me read this. Let's say you're an informal mediator to a conflict between Christians in your house church. It was a business dispute that was 9 months ago over one person building a website for the other person. They disagree on how much it was worth, what was agreed upon, and how much is still owed, okay? And everybody in the rest of the whole Anchorage church knows about it, okay? What is the driving North Star for the mediator? This brief exercise will talk about the priorities for this dispute. Which of the order of the priorities from the dispute that is mediated or whatever, and for each item place one of 4, well, I have 3 possible answers. 1, the first most important currency, or the second. Also identify what's the least important. Let's walk through these for a second. The social harmony of the church. The whole Anchorage church knows about this. Is your number 1 goal to help with this business dispute to make Ray Naden and the rest of the church happy with it? Is that your number? Don't answer out loud. Is that your number 1 goal? Is your number 1 goal achieving a real picture about the dispute or conflict? Is that your number 1? Is it achieving a truthful and just outcome? What about protecting God's name in the community? Family members of the church members who are not Christians know about this issue. Okay? Resolving the relationships for the long run. Saving face for a person. Let's say one person is really obviously guilty. Saving face for them. And there may be a component where there's gender or ethnicity factor, and maybe they process shame in a really drastic way. So you're trying to save face. Or the well-being of the 2 parties, their well-being. Or lastly, practicing impartial, defendable, and consistent practices. What's the number 1 thing on your mind as the mediator? Okay, think about that for a couple of minutes, and then also think about what's the least important too. Okay. Okay. The first one here, social harmony of the institution. How many felt like that's the most important thing? One. Okay, and why do you think that?
On the spot. Well, I know it. I thought of that one because when everyone's on the same page and we know where we're all going, and everyone's been heard, understood, known, and feels valued, then we can all move forward together.
Okay. I would say that's a high currency. The reason it can't be the first one is even cults and delusions can have social harmony. So they could actually believe the wrong thing. So that doesn't protect it from actually solving a problem. But social harmony is something that really comes in very important if you did get to truth, okay? Achieving a real picture about the dispute or the conflict. How about that? How about you said that was the most important? Okay, you did? And why?
Because I think like when the both parties were heard, that you were able to hear all the details,
Right.
and so they feel both of them feel safe.
Okay. Yeah, that is like, how can you not argue that that's not important? But why might that also not satisfy the needs of the situation? Yes.
What I mean, if everything's been laid out on the table, it doesn't necessarily mean that the conflict or the dispute has been actually solved.
Right.
Because somebody-
They may agree on the story, but something else may be going on that's not brought closure. How about achieving a truthful and just outcome? Yes. Okay. Okay, raise your hands again on that. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I would say almost a third say that one. Okay. Why might that not be a good one? Yes.
Because even though you're a third party, or you may not be completely objective, and you may not be able to convince either party that it is the truth. That would be the weaker part of that argument.
Well, let's say that they all agreed. Let's say that all of you walked away and said that was true, that was just.
Feelings.
Okay.
Sure.
We're going to come back to that one. We're going to come back to that one. What about protecting God's name in the community? Okay. 5 of you picked that. Okay. Why might that not be a good one?
I think.
Okay.
Would people like try to like cover stuff up or like not be completely like all the way about what
Right.
actually happened to try to make everything look all clean and stuff?
Okay, there's this thing in churches where there's a sacred cow. You don't talk about it. You don't go there. If you do, things will blow up. So we'll keep it under the rug because we don't want the world out there to know we got scandals in our church. So that's the problem with that one. Now, God's name in the community, we should care about that. But if you care about it too much, you're actually hurting God's name in the community. Because when it eventually comes out, they'll say, oh, they've been keeping that secret for 25 years. You're going to say something? Oh, you're just kind of combing your hair. Gotcha. Okay. Resolving relationships in the long run. Okay, that's getting good. About 8 people on that one. Okay. Saving face for somebody of a gender or some sort of ethnic status. How important is that? Nobody picked that. Okay. Sorry. Now that's huge in some Asian cultures.
Yeah.
It's big. And people will even go so far as to apologize for something they didn't do in order to equalize the room because they don't want somebody to feel too much shame. So they'll kind of spread out the shame and the blame. It's kind of it's a strange thing to us in the West, but it's big. The well-being of the rights and the members of the church. How important? Okay. All right. And why might that not be your prime currency?
Maybe a change needs to happen.
What's that?
Maybe a change needs to happen, but it doesn't feel good at the time.
Okay. Oh, yeah. It may feel like injustice, or it might feel like what's right, but later on we might have a different view of it. Okay? What about practicing impartial, defendable, consistent processes? Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's about 6 on there. 7. Okay, gotcha. Okay, guess what? I don't have the silver bullet answer. However, I want us to think about a couple things. The problem with the bottom one is, and that's so important, the bottom one. But what if you did all that? People don't believe that it's truthful and impartial, whatever. Okay? So I particularly believe that achieving a truthful and just outcome, even if somebody goes away sad, if it's just, that's what it is. Okay? I'm not going to try to control how people feel about things. I want to be able to answer to them, answer to the community, answer to God. We got to the truth. We went for justice. And if we couldn't get people to see it on their own, we built in a caveat that if they couldn't figure it out, that they would let me or some other mediator render an outcome, a verdict, an interpretation that will go with the community. Now I want to tell you a practice. No, by the way, I'm not binding that on you. I'm talking about what has been most endured. In Hawaii, we, as the United States, did to them what we did to Alaska, the 48 states. We so damaged the local indigenous cultures. In the 1970s, and this was back in the 1890s, in the 1970s, people wanted to recover the very best of what it meant to be Hawaiian. They did research and they talked to the elders of the islands, old people. And they recovered a lot of things, but one of the practices they recovered is their conflict resolution culture. And somebody documented it and wrote about it. And this author named Victoria Shook wrote a book called Ho'oponopono, which means, I've pronounced it wrong because I don't have the accent, and I don't know, but it really means to make things right. Here's what it looks like. And this so translates to the church world. Something goes wrong between two people. 15 people know about it. Okay? So you pull 15 people together. And you begin with a prayer, and you end with, or you begin with a commitment that at the end, I, the big kahuna, the priest, will render a verdict. But we want the community to be able to shape it before it gets to that point. So in the middle of the room, you take a net, a fishing net, you tie it up into knots. And you ask the parties to express their perspective, and then the community. And anytime something seems helpful, the kahuna says, you can go untie one of the knots. And then as this goes around over and over and over again, hopefully the net gets untangled a little bit more and more, and the story emerges. And lights go on, aha moments happen. People go, oh, so that's what it was. Then at the end, if there's not the sufficient humility where everybody's in agreement and parties have owned up or whatever, the kahuna head says, this is what I render as the judgment. He goes from mediator to arbitrator. And everybody commits to never talking about the situation ever again is over. Wow. They have a meal and a prayer. And that's the end of it. Now they have to do something like that. Here's why. On an island, you're going to keep running into each other. So you have to end the story. Even if it doesn't end with perfect justice, you have to end it. Because otherwise, it'll mutate and take on a life of its own. And the community helps make sure it's over, it's done, it's passed. And I can handle an unjust outcome towards me if I believe that the system is in place to watch now. You know. But there's all sorts of nuances to this. And this has been baptized even in Hawaii. Ministers in the islands know about this, and they have the Christian version of it. So anyway, yes.
What was the book?
It's called Ho'oponopono. And if you look up Victoria Shook, it's on Amazon. Okay, it's fascinating. But if you email me, I'll reply back with some stuff I wrote about it because I've condensed it for church work. But so anyway, that's an example. This is art, not science. This is not scripture, but that resonates with scripture. because it's the community's involvement. You're pursuing a reality, get justice. Witnesses are important, which they are in Scripture. And you're thinking about closure. Okay, so the exercise was just meant to make you think about the implications of what you zero in on. Because what you zero in on may not factor in for how the long-term implications of it. Okay, now the session. You're going to hold a meeting. Literally, I had 3 sessions in November in a church in Southern California with staff people. High-level conflict, been going on for months. April through September. October, we began this process. So we would have a room. We would all meet. They came in with their presenting stories. I had read them. I'd help edit them. We could begin with the prayer. We have freshmen in the room. Everybody knows who's going to be in the room. There's no surprises. They even know the talking points. They're not going to be sideswiped. There's not going to be any shock. This is all, they kind of know what it is. And then we have people circle up, and we have an empty chair. In the empty chair, I tell them, is to represent God. God is here. He's watching you, and he's watching me. And so don't forget God in this. Because we want to know what he thinks. So where's the meeting? Who's in the room? We clarify the roles. Sometimes you'll have a witness or a backup to the mediator if somebody's asked to side caucus, to talk with somebody they can process something with. You can stop the meeting at any time. Safety is everything. And if you just need to take a break or whatever, seating arrangement, you don't want to have sides on sides of the table. I had a mediation one time where there was 6 people versus 2. And I didn't want to have all 6 sitting together versus the 2. So I broke them all up and spread them throughout the room. And then brought outside parties as witnesses. So as you looked at it, you couldn't kind of figure the 6 versus the 2. Anyway, you do things, prayer, hope, and then I also do training at the beginning. I make sure they get some skill sets. If they've not attended one of my workshops or whatever, they're going to get some stuff as we go. Okay. Any comments or questions? Okay, cool. Are you ready? Okay, you're going to become a mediator today. Okay.
Oh, great. I was wondering what's young.
So I'm actually, right after I leave here, I go to Seattle and I do 6 hours of training. And then I come back another time this year, do 3 more hours. And then later at the end of the year, I do 3 more. They'll have homework, tests, books they have to read, papers they have to read, assignments for real world mediation, and then I'll give them certification. Doesn't mean anything in the court system. It's just for the church work, it'll mean something because I'm really going to work them hard. And my test is grueling. But I will share with you, this is a primer. What you see on the next page with the tree is all about how to break apart a conflict and understand the conflict tree. Every conflict has a prologue. Data, things that have happened, feelings, maybe early red flags. That's why you have a presenting story paper. Sometimes you could just know it's going to happen. You just don't know when. And so there's those things that are out there. Then the flashpoint. That's the moment that everybody can say, June 29th for the wedding cake incidents. When the van pulled up on the wedding cake. And it pulled up on the grass when it wasn't supposed to pull up on the grass. Because we were told not to. There was a sign that said, do not pull up on the grass. But they pulled up on the grass. Well, the driver says, but the cake was melting. And we needed to do everything we could to get it inside. And then there was the arguments. And there were witnesses. The wedding cake incident had a huge, huge impact on the church. That's the flashpoint. Boundaries. If somebody broke a known rule, an exception to the rule, a covenant, an HR agreement, a scripture, those norms. We built protocols and that was outside of decorum. Okay? Is there ever an excuse for breaking a boundary of any kind whatsoever? Is there?
Yeah.
Okay, what's an example of when there is?
Well, when you're carrying a wedding cake, you I don't want to carry a wedding cake across the grass. I can't.
Yeah. Okay, right. Good point. Do you think that the wedding cake was really the issue? Do you think there was some history? There was history. There was 9 years of history. It was pent up all into one moment. Okay. Why else might a boundary not be bad if you broke it?
Safety.
What's that?
Safety.
Okay, safety. Okay, yes. What else?
As a teacher, I know that if a student tells me something, I want to keep it confident unless it's going to call, if it puts them in danger.
Okay, so confidentiality can be broken on extreme situation or unusual situation. Did Sully dropping the plane into the Hudson against the practices and the training, was that appropriate?
Yes.
How do you know?
Yeah.
The argument, because there was as the movie says it was a trial, it wasn't a trial exactly like that, but was a deep assessment, is that Sully did violate protocol. There was a way to save the plane and the people according to the protocols. However, there was insights that he had from the situation that said, forget the protocol. And he did the right thing. And there's a whole thing in risk management that says when it's appropriate, how do you know? Okay. But so boundaries are huge because you just don't flippantly violate scripture or anything, any rules or decorum or norms. But every once in a while, there's that thing you go, okay, that makes sense. So boundary or prologue and flashpoint are the lowest hanging fruit. We know the back history of, hey, we used to be in a Bible box since 1983. We had some awkwardness in the mid-90s. That's all stuff that you can kind of put into it. The flashpoint, people are going to remember their portion of it. So you put all portions. Sometimes I'll have a large version of this tree and we'll write it all in. And their portion of the flashpoint gets written down. And then the next part is the boundaries. Was their contract broken? A rule or whatever. Constraints, okay? That limited resources. Let's say, I think, okay, church leader, I think we should hire interns to be on campus. But another minister says, we haven't had a pay raise in 4 years. And you can do one and not the other. But let's say an elder is saying, I think we should hire interns on campus and my son would be a great intern.
Oh.
The minister says, yeah, but you think we should get paid what the lowest paid teacher in the congregation gets paid, and I've got 4 kids. Okay, that's a constraint issue, right? What are some other constraint issues that could come up?
If a decision, like whatever the thing is, has to be reached by this time.
Okay, time, yeah.
Yeah, anytime there's a limited resource, so you mentioned financial, but maybe like we know people will engage with this many things in a given month, therefore we shouldn't create extra events,
Right.
that kind of a thing.
Yep. That's good. What if you have a party in a conflict story that has a wellness condition or a sickness like they've had surgery and they're on medicine? That gets a constraint because that person may not be seeing reality really well at that time. So that becomes part of the story that the mediator has to navigate. Yeah. Okay. Let's talk now about relationship. That's about history. What's that?
That's like I have a question about the constraints. real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
On the thing you said, even moods. Like, if it's like really like fresh, is that like a constraint, or what is What does that mean?
It's something that the mediator doesn't have control over. One of the parties doesn't have control. Either one might. It's just one of those things you have to at least acknowledge. Mood is the nice word to also say they may be depressed or have some sort of condition that has to be acknowledged. Doesn't make them bad. It's just part of it. And by the way, it's almost every situation I deal with, there's somebody who's either damaged emotionally or some sort of way. They don't see reality the way that the outside party does. And it's not, doesn't mean that they're on the wrong side, it just means it's a factor. You know. So, a good question. Okay, so now, relationship history. What if somebody has a social style that's so dynamic and intense and loud, and their eyes are big when they express their viewpoints, and the person they're in conflict with is much more laid back? You think that can affect the conflict?
Oh, yes.
Okay. You think the person who's so,
Adamant.
are they more bad?
No.
Yes.
Or depends on the situation.
It does depend on the situation. What could be a good explanation for that dynamism?
Passionate.
Okay, that can be, but what's another good explanation? What about the culture?
That's true.
What cultures, not stereotype, but like more of a prototype, might you see more of a dynamic, extroverted, passionate, yells their points kind of a way of expressing themselves?
Italians.
You prejudiced people. One of the things I learned in cross-cultural mediation, the difference between a stereotype and a prototype is in a given culture, there are reoccurring kinds of things that do happen that you have to be able to talk about. Like Italians and Greeks are being very animated, but they're not offended by it in their own families. So it's not really bad. So now you're really dealing with cultural awareness, in fact, helping everybody learn and grow from their dynamics with each other. And you got to be able to talk about that. Stereotypes is when you say Germans and Greeks and Italians are just too intense. Okay. Yes.
What about, are any, like, either African Americans or I've seen a lot of some, like, Hawaiian Pacificers who are a lot more animated or like.
Okay. Yeah, no, there are lots of subcultures that are like that. Or even a family culture that's not from any of those backgrounds, but they develop that way of hashing things out. So a mediator will uncover this and talk about, is that a dynamic here? And there'll be a teaching moment for both sides. You don't want to focus on the animated person. You don't want to focus on the receiving person. You want to say, hey, can we create a Rosetta Stone relationship here? When you're animated, could you dial it down? But when you understand when they're animated, it doesn't mean they hate you. It just means there's forgiveness.
Right.
Is there a way that you can navigate a way to have that conversation in front of us right now, where we can help coach you to simmer down and coach you to hear it better? That kind of thing. Okay. So that's the kind of thing that can happen. The other ways that relationship stuff can be there is if there is an unresolved incident from 12 years earlier that's being harbored in the heart of one person. So you want to say, what's your history? What's it like? So there was a ministry one time where there was this husband and wife that they were the ma and pa of the ministry. They were ma and pa. Everybody viewed them that way. They were older than most other people. They were incredible people. Laid their lives down. Just incredible. But when another minister came in, it was like, ooh, what do you do? Do you know where the ma and pa of this ministry? And they just from get-go. And the incoming one tried real hard to become friends, and it was just like, I should have never moved here. So when they later had many, many conflicts, and once they got sorted out, they had to tell the mediators, this goes back to 1993. And it was sorted out in 2011. That's a lot of history in there. So that's a relationship dynamic. Okay, values. Okay, what's an example of two Christians being spiritual, godly, but their order of their values are different? Like one might view honor and respect as the most important, and the other one may view truth as the most important. What would be an example of how that might affect the conflict? Where would that happen? Where would that be? What would it look like when they're on different pages? Yes.
How they expect the outcome to turn out.
Okay, how they expect the outcome to turn out?
Trying to reiterate what you're saying over and over again.
Okay, so the person who views truth as more important may not show enough honor in the mind of the other person when they're talking about it. They might feel disrespected. The person says, "But let's get the truth. We got a naked emperor here. We got a sacred cow. We got an elephant in the room." You know, well, that person's not feeling respected, so they're so offended by the presentation. But the person who only cares about honor sometimes might be just not dealing with truth, just wanting to make sure everybody views them very highly. Yes.
What you're saying seems to apply to the fact that there's no magical answer in the questions that you gave us to
Right.
prioritize. And it's like they might have different ways of prioritizing their views.
Can be, the situation can affect the priorities. I would agree with that, yes.
And I was gonna ask, because honor and respect could be towards the person and how is it an elder in the church or is it somebody who's like older within the church? Because a lot of times people, when you have respect and honor as your value,
Right.
rather than truth, a lot of times we place a higher emphasis on the person.
You're getting to what I want to emphasize. What's your first name?
Ashley?
Ashley, that's so true. So what happens is, you know why this is on the higher branches?
Yeah.
Is this not the lower hanging fruit? This is harder up here. True story, we had the president of Harding University come to the Chicago church 2 years ago to speak, this month, 2 years ago, to speak to all the leaders. He grew up in Jerusalem. Everett Hufford is his name. And he worshipped in Jerusalem, made friends that were Jews, made friends that were Muslims. He's the only person to this day that he knows as a Christian, Church of Christ guy, who actually has met with all the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, all the main leaders. And so he says to this group of 300 Christians in the Chicago church, he said, you know, Christians and Jews and Muslims, they all have the same core values. Of course, we're like, yeah, right. He says, after a long enough time delay, he says, but we order them very differently. He says, you would be surprised at the people that you think don't care about justice or freedom or independence and rights the way American Christians do. He says they view those things as important too. That they might put honor of the family way up here and all these things. And he said that happens in the church too. So what you have to do is know your opponent. And so that you're playing to the best and recognizing their value, because you actually recognize their higher values, but just in a lower way. You know, and these are usually all good, virtuous values. But how you prioritize them are different. That's why it's higher up in the tree. These are harder to deal with. By the way, I don't mediate kind of things like this by myself. I do mediation teams. Sometimes you have your own blinders, you know. So then, identity. If somebody feels like who they are as a person that they can't change who they are, could be their gender, could be their age, their race, their generation, could be just the way that they're wired, is insulted, you are looking for war. Somebody's identity is the highest, hardest one to deal with. There was the church in Hawaii in 1998 that had a switch of an incredible lead couple with a very young couple that was inexperienced, super white American. Comes into the church, and 50 people told me, and when I did this consulting gig, that this couple came and insulted Hawaiian culture, left and right, using white Euro-American paradigms, kind of like we did in the 1890s when we violated their culture. And it created a lance, a scar on the church. It took years to really get sorted out. Because their identity, you can't change being Hawaiian. Like I can't change being, I'm actually a mutt of a lot of cultures, so, you know, but I can't change who I am, right? So do you get this thing about identity? Any comments or questions on this? Okay, we're going to take one question because I'm running out of time, I just realized. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask, in myself included, I'm in a generation where we have our own truths and nothing is sacred,
Yeah.
essentially. How do you mediate somebody or with somebody whose values constantly change depending on the situation? Because we all want to be right and we all want to be on top. So like that's what I see a lot. And talking to people, it's like you can never be right.
In society, that's just so hard.
Yeah.
And the church is still hard with some millennials that fall in that category. They don't believe in church discipline and taking hard stands and may not even grasp the concept of conviction the same way that older generations do. I think it's good to lay that foundation before the mediation gets started. You might even, if you know this is going to be an issue, you can coach a person, caucus them on the side. Say, what do you believe is absolutely not negotiable? You know, but it's challenging because it's up there in the values. It's one of the higher branches. You know. Let's get to the roots. It turns out that none of the things we've talked about are as serious as I just made them. Because sometimes what's really going on is something that mediators call below the line. They have a lack of rational thought that really what the conflict is about is hopes and dreams and hurts and fears about the future, about what the conflict meant. And they've misinterpreted it. So what you want to do is to say, what's really driving you? But they're not going to do that unless they feel safe. So the reason you spend time around the branches is to make them feel safe and to hear and understand and whatever. But eventually you want to say, I would like to hear what it is you're feeling right now. Might have to be privately before it can be in the bigger group. But you want to figure out what's driving it. Because sometimes somebody has interpreted the conflict to mean they're never going to be on staff. They're never going to have what they were looking for. And it's a false conclusion. But that's where they went. So they process things really darkly. And the way that we get people to talk about what's driving it, the stuff below the line, is you validate their emotions. Not to say they're right, because emotions are not right or wrong many times, they just are, right? So you say, hey, I recognize you're feeling strongly about this, and I feel for you right now. And I've felt in your position before where I felt very strongly that I was not being heard. And I want to make sure that doesn't happen here. We want to hear you. And the other thing is you talk about their ideal outcomes. Say, give me 3 different kind of outcomes that you could see being acceptable here. And maybe 2 of them are not going to be possible, and you know that. But the fact that they've aired them means they're heard. And maybe 1 of them you can work with. And you'll say, then they're starting to play better in the mediation. And if you emphasize process and it's safe, meaning, hey, listen, I know we've had a lot here. It's been an hour and a half on our mediation here. Let us take 2 days, and I'll be available for the next 2 days. And let's talk about it. Do you feel good about the process? Do you feel like I'm being impartial? Is there anything you think I could be doing better? And what you're doing is you're making them as humans feel like they matter, and you're looking to find some sort of resolution that's going to work for everybody. And eventually this kind of stuff comes out. You learn things about them that you might not have ever learned, so the whole thing can become a good. I'm going to speed up to the closing out of conflict. Let's just say we landed. We figured it out. Mediator says, replays what has just happened. They go, yep, that's what it was. And how about we write it up? All the people that know about this, they're watching, they're going to want to hear, we shouldn't give them different stories. Let's write up a narrative that we can agree with. That itself can move it back a little bit, because sometimes when you write it down, people go, no, I don't like that word, whatever. But you eventually can get something they can work with. Now, I have to tell you something in closing. I did 3 mediations in this church this fall, this other church. And these things went on for 6 months. It was intense. And in one of the mediations, we had a surprise ending. It went so well. I was blown away. It went well. And I said, how about we write up all the lessons learned? And all 3 conflicts overlapped. Everybody knew everybody else's. So how about we write a lessons learned about what's happened in this conflict? And we came up with 14 things. And I said, let's look over these. Do you think that these apply to the other 2? So then I went to the other 2, parties in the mediations, the other two. And we came up with this memorandum that we released to the church. And if we would have done these things back, months earlier, we would not be here right now. Then we pulled the whole church together, 550 people, and we had devotional lesson. This is after our church services in the afternoon. We had devotional lesson, cleared reputations of rumors that were wrong that got out there, had each person tell what they learned and where they wronged the other party up on stage. Then we came up, so the mediators came up and commended them for what they did, and we cited some of the practices that we are now committing to as a staff that were not part of our practice in before. And the church was in tears. And people said, I respect these leaders more than I ever did before because of this. This makes me feel like we're really, really family. And then the congregation can learn from the message out. So anyway, this stuff works. Okay. Any comments or questions?
Just thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.